Jake Rodriguez never thought he'd end up babysitting aliens. After 12 years in the military, fighting battles on 3 different planets, he figured his next assignment would be something normal, maybe training new recruits back on Earth, or working security at some boring government facility. Instead, here he was, standing in the briefing room of Orbital Station 7, learning about the most important job of his career. The war with the Crystal people had lasted 23 years. 23 long years of fighting an enemy that looked like walking diamonds and could slice through steel with their bare hands. Jake had lost friends in that war, good people who never made it home to see their families again. So when the peace talks finally succeeded 6 months ago, everyone thought the fighting was over for good. But peace, Jake was learning, was a lot more complicated than war. "Listen up, soldiers," Captain Williams said, pointing to the hologram floating in the center of the room. It showed a tall, shimmering figure that looked like it was made of blue glass. "This is Princess Zara of the Crystal Empire. She's coming. Here for what they call a cultural exchange. Think of it as a very important school visit. Except if we mess this up, the war starts again." Jake studied the image carefully. The princess was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way. Her body seemed to catch and reflect light from every angle, creating rainbow patterns that danced across her crystalline skin. But her face, while elegant, looked cold and distant, like she was looking down on everything around her. "The crystals are big on respect and tradition," the captain continued. "They have all these fancy ceremonies and rules about how to act around their royalty. Rodriguez, you've been chosen as head of the honor guard. That means you're responsible for keeping the princess safe and happy during her 2-week stay." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Sir, with respect, wouldn't someone with more diplomatic experience be better for this job?" Captain Williams smiled. "The brass specifically asked for you, Rodriguez. They want someone with real combat experience, someone the crystals will respect as a warrior. Plus, you've got the cleanest service record in the unit. No disciplinary actions, multiple commendations for bravery, and you speak 3 languages. None of which are crystal, sir. That's what the translation devices are for. The important thing is that you represent the best of humanity. These crystal folks are proud people. They think they're better than us in every way. Your job is to prove them wrong without starting another war." Over the next 3 days, Jake threw himself into preparation like never before. He studied crystal culture until his eyes hurt. He learned that they organized their society like a pyramid, with the royal family at the top and everyone else ranked below them based on their achievements and bloodline. They valued honor above everything else, even life itself. In their language, the worst thing you could call someone was without honor. He practiced their greeting ceremonies over and over. The crystals had different bows for different ranks of people. Bow too shallow, and you insulted them. Bow too deep, and you insulted yourself. There were specific ways to stand, specific ways to speak, even specific ways to walk when in the presence of royalty. Jake also learned about their military traditions. Crystal warriors were known throughout the galaxy for their skill and discipline. They trained from childhood to be perfect. Soldiers, never questioning orders, never showing weakness. During the war, human forces had learned to fear the sound of their battle formations, thousands of crystal feet moving in perfect unison across the battlefield. The more he learned, the more nervous he became. These weren't just aliens with different customs. These were beings who had nearly conquered half the galaxy before humans even learned to build spaceships. They had technology that seemed like magic and fighting skills that made human soldiers look like children playing with toys. But Jake also learned something else. The war hadn't been easy for the crystals either. They had lost many of their people, too. Their home planet had been damaged by human weapons. Their emperor had sent his own daughter to make peace because he was tired of watching his people die in a war that nobody could really win. Maybe, Jake thought, Princess Zara was just as nervous about this meeting as he was. On the morning of Her arrival, Jake stood in the main docking bay wearing his best dress uniform. Every button was polished. Every crease was perfect. Behind him, 20 other soldiers stood at attention in 2 perfect rows. They had practiced this formation for hours, making sure every movement was synchronized, every detail was flawless. The princess's ship was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It looked like it was carved from a single massive crystal, all smooth curves and glowing edges. When it touched down on the landing platform, it didn't make a sound. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Jake held his breath. Princess Zara stepped out first, and Jake immediately understood why the crystals thought they were superior. She moved with the grace of a dancer and the confidence of a queen. Her crystalline body caught the station's lights and threw them back in brilliant colors that painted the walls around her. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, and carried herself like someone who had never doubted her place in the universe. Behind her came her guards and advisors, all moving in perfect formation. They wore no armor that Jake could see, but their crystal bodies looked strong enough to stop bullets. Each one carried themselves with the same proud bearing as their princess. Jake stepped forward and performed the greeting bow he had practiced so many times. Not too shallow, not too deep, holding it for exactly 3 seconds before straightening. "Up! Your Highness," he said through his translation device. "Welcome to Orbital Station 7. I am Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez, and I have the honor of serving as your escort during your stay." Princess Zara looked at him for a long moment, her multifaceted eyes studying every detail of his appearance. Jake felt like a bug under a microscope. Finally, she nodded slightly. "We shall see if humans understand the meaning of honor, Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying easily across the docking bay. "Your reputation suggests otherwise, but perhaps we will be pleasantly surprised." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral. This was going to be a very long 2 weeks. The first 2 days went better than Jake had hoped. Princess Zara seemed genuinely interested in learning about human culture, asking questions about everything from their food to their music. She toured the station's research labs, watched demonstrations of human technology, and even sat through a presentation about Earth's history. Jake began to think that maybe, just maybe, this assignment wouldn't be the disaster he'd feared. But he should have known better. In his 12 years of military service, Jake had learned that when things seemed to be going too well, something was about to go very wrong. It was during the 3rd day's activities that everything fell apart. The plan was simple. Show Princess Zara a standard military training exercise to demonstrate human tactical abilities. Nothing fancy, just a basic formation drill that Jake's unit had performed hundreds of times before, the kind of thing they could do in their sleep. Jake had personally inspected every piece of equipment that morning. He'd gone over the drill sequence with each soldier 3 times. He'd even checked the weather sensors to make sure there wouldn't be any unexpected problems. Everything was perfect. The exercise was taking place in Training Bay 4, the largest open space on the station. Princess Zara and her advisors stood on the observation platform, looking down at the training floor, where 20 human soldiers were arranged in formation. Jake stood at attention beside the princess, feeling proud of how professional his people looked. "Begin exercise Alpha 7, Jake called out, his voice echoing in the large space. The soldiers moved like clockwork. Squad 1 advanced to secure the mock objective, while Squad 2 provided covering positions. Squad 3 prepared to flank around the obstacle course. It was textbook military precision, the kind of coordinated movement that had won battles across 3 star systems. Then Private Tommy Wilson made the mistake that changed everything. Tommy was 19 years old, fresh out of basic training, and eager to impress everyone watching. Maybe he was nervous about performing in front of alien royalty. Maybe he was trying too hard to be perfect. Whatever the reason, when he reached for his communications gear during the exercise, his sweaty palm slipped. Instead of activating his squad radio, Tommy accidentally hit the emergency beacon on his belt. Immediately, alarm sirens began wailing. Throughout the entire station, red warning lights flashed in every corridor. Emergency protocols kicked in automatically, sealing blast doors and activating defense systems. The computer's voice boomed over the speakers. Emergency situation detected. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. The perfectly choreographed training exercise instantly turned into chaos. Some soldiers instinctively moved toward emergency positions. Others stopped in confusion, not sure if this was part of the drill or a real crisis. A few began looking around wildly, trying to figure out what was happening. Jake felt his heart sink as he watched his carefully planned demonstration fall apart in front of the most important audience he'd ever had. But his training kicked in. Immediately. This was exactly the kind of crisis situation he'd been dealing with his entire career. All personnel, maintain positions. Jake barked into his communicator. This is a false alarm. Private Wilson, deactivate your emergency beacon. Immediately. Squad leaders, reform your units and continue the exercise. Within 30 seconds, Jake had restored order. The alarms stopped wailing, the emergency lights stopped flashing, and his soldiers snapped back into their proper positions. The whole crisis had lasted less than a minute, and Jake had handled it exactly the way any good commander should. Quickly, calmly, and effectively. He turned to Princess Zara, ready to apologize for the disruption and explain what had happened. Maybe he could even use this as an example of how human soldiers adapted to unexpected situations. But when he saw the expression on her crystalline face, his blood turned to ice. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't understanding. She was looking at him and his soldiers with pure contempt. How absolutely pathetic, Princess Zara said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The translation device made sure every word was perfectly clear, each syllable dripping with disdain. Is this truly what humans call military excellence? Jake felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. Your Highness, Private Wilson made a simple mistake with his equipment. These things happened during— A simple mistake? Princess Zara interrupted, her voice rising. Your entire formation collapsed from one soldier's incompetence. In the Crystal military, such a failure would be unthinkable. Our warriors train from childhood to achieve perfection, not to stumble around like confused children. Around him, Jake could hear his soldiers shifting uncomfortably. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond to this insult. But Princess Zara wasn't finished. Perhaps this explains why humans always flee when facing true opposition, she continued, her words hitting like physical blows. Even your lowest servants show more competence than what I have witnessed here today. How your species survived this long is truly a mystery. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to remain still. He thought about all the human soldiers who had died fighting her people, good men and women who had given everything to protect their families and their homes. He thought about the battles he'd fought, the friends he'd lost, the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd ever see Earth again. He thought about Tommy Wilson, barely 19 years old, whose face was now burning red with shame and embarrassment. The kid had made one small mistake during what should have been a routine exercise, and now he was being humiliated in front of everyone. Jake had spent 3 days preparing for this moment, learning about crystal culture, studying their customs, trying to build a bridge between their two peoples. He'd genuinely believed that Princess Zara wanted to understand humans better, to find common ground that could ensure lasting peace. But looking at her now, seeing the cold superiority in her multifaceted eyes, Jake realized he'd been fooling himself. She hadn't come here to learn about humans. She'd come to confirm what she already believed, that her people were better than his in every possible way. The training bay had gone completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding. In his ears, every person in the room was waiting to see what he would do next. His military training told him to stay calm, to de-escalate the situation, to remember the bigger picture of peace between their peoples. But sometimes, Jake realized, there were things more important than following orders. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and began unfastening the clasps on his ceremonial armor. The sound of Jake's armor hitting the floor echoed through the training bay like gunshots. First his shoulder plates, then his chest piece, each piece of ceremonial metal clanging against the polished deck with a finality that made everyone in the room freeze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Princess Zara seemed stunned by what she was witnessing. Jake had worn that armor with pride for 8 years. Every scratch on it told a story of battles fought and won. The dent in the left shoulder plate came from shrapnel on Kepler Station. The scorch mark on the chest piece was from a crystal weapon that had nearly killed him during the siege of New Mars. This wasn't just equipment to him, it was a symbol of everything he'd sacrificed for his people and his planet. But right now, it felt like a costume he was wearing for someone who would never understand what it really meant. "Sergeant Rodriguez!" Captain Williams's voice crackled through his earpiece, urgent and confused. "What are you doing? Stand down immediately!" Jake reached up and pulled out his earpiece, letting it fall to the floor with the rest of his gear. He wasn't taking orders right now, not from anyone. His fellow soldiers watched in shock as their leader continued stripping away the symbols of his rank. The ceremonial sword that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. The metal ribbons that represented 12 years of faithful service. The unit patches that connected him to brothers in arms across the galaxy. Each piece that hit the floor felt like he was shedding a part of himself, but also like he was finding something he'd lost along the way. "This is most irregular," one of Princess Zara's advisors whispered, his crystalline face flickering with what looked like concern. "Should we summon additional security?" "No," Princess Zara said firmly, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I want to see what this human thinks he's accomplishing." Jake could feel every eye in the room on him as he folded his dress uniform jacket with the same precision he'd used to put it on that morning. The fabric was still warm from his body, still carried the scent of the soap he'd used to make sure. Everything was perfect for this assignment. When he placed the jacket on top of the pile of discarded armor, Jake stood in nothing but his simple gray undershirt and black pants. For the first time since Princess Zara had arrived, he wasn't wearing anything that marked his rank, his position, or his role in this diplomatic mission. He was just a man standing in a room full of people who suddenly didn't know what to make of him. The silence stretched on until it became almost unbearable. Jake could hear the hum of the station's life support systems, the distant sound of footsteps in the corridors outside, the nervous breathing of the soldiers around him. But in this moment, in this space, everything else had stopped. Finally, Jake raised his eyes and looked directly at Princess Zara. Not the careful, respectful gaze of a subordinate addressing royalty, not the studied neutrality of a diplomat, trying to avoid offense. This was one person looking at another person, equal to equal, with nothing between them but the truth. "Your Highness," Jake said, and his voice carried clearly through the vast training bay. "I came here because I believed in something. I believed that 2 peoples who had been fighting each other for over 20 years might finally find a way to understand each other." Princess Zara opened her mouth to respond, but Jake held up his hand. For the first time in 3 days, she actually stopped talking and listened. "I spent 3 days learning about your culture," Jake continued. "I studied your language, your customs, your history. I wanted to show you the best of what humanity could offer. I wanted to prove that we deserved your respect, just like you deserve ours." He gestured toward the pile of armor at his feet. "This uniform, these medals, this equipment, they don't make me who I am, but they represent something important. They represent every human soldier who died fighting for what they believed in. Every person who sacrificed everything to protect their families and their homes." Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke, filled with a conviction that surprised even him. That young soldier who made a mistake today? His name is Tommy Wilson. He's 19 years old. He joined the military because his older brother died in the war with your people, and he wanted to make sure no other families had to go through what his did. Tommy, standing in formation with the other soldiers, looked up in surprise. His face was still red with embarrassment, but now there were tears in his eyes. When that alarm went off, Jake continued, my soldiers didn't panic. They didn't run. They looked to their leaders for guidance, and when I gave them orders, they followed them instantly. In less than 30 seconds, we turned chaos back into order. That's not weakness, Your Highness. That's exactly what good soldiers are supposed to do. Princess Zara's crystalline features were hard to read, but something in her posture had changed. She was no longer standing with the casual arrogance she'd shown moments before. But you know what? Jake said, shaking his head. None of that matters to you. You didn't come here to learn about us. You came here to confirm what you already believed, that humans are inferior to your people in every way that counts. He took a step toward her, and several crystal guards tensed, their hands moving toward weapons that weren't there. But Princess Zara held up her own hand, stopping them. I won't wear the symbols of honor for someone who has no respect for the people who earned them, Jake said simply. I won't stand at attention for someone who thinks my friends died for nothing. And I won't pretend that this is diplomacy when it's really just another kind of warfare. The training bay had never been quieter. Even the station's background noise seemed to have faded away, leaving only the sound of Jake's steady breathing and the soft hum of Princess Zara's translation device. So here's what I'm going to do, Jake announced, his voice calm and steady. I'm going to walk out of this room. I'm going to go back to my quarters. And I'm going to pack my things because I don't think there's anything left for me to do here. He turned toward the exit, each step deliberate and measured. Behind him, he could hear whispers starting up, human voices mixing with the musical tones of crystal speech. Someone was probably already calling Captain Williams. Someone else was probably trying to figure out if this was treason or just a really bad career move. But Jake didn't look back. For the first time in 3 days, he felt like himself again. As he reached the doorway, he paused for just a moment. Without turning around, he spoke one last time. For what it's worth, Your Highness, I really did hope we could be friends. Then Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez walked out of Training Bay 4, leaving behind everything he'd worked 12 years to earn, and somehow feeling lighter than he had in years. The news spread through Orbital Station 7 like wildfire. Within an hour of Jake's dramatic exit from Training Bay 4, everyone on the station knew what had happened. The story grew with each telling. Some said he'd thrown his armor at the princess's feet. Others claimed he'd given a speech that made grown soldiers cry, and a few even whispered that he'd challenged her to single combat. But the basic facts remained the same no matter who told the story. A human soldier had walked away from the most important diplomatic assignment of his career because an alien princess had insulted his people. And now nobody knew what would happen next. In the command center, Captain Williams was having the worst day of his military career. His communication panel was lighting up like a Christmas tree with incoming messages from Earth Command, the Diplomatic Corps, and about a dozen other agencies that all wanted to know how he'd managed to let one soldier destroy 23 years of peace negotiations. Sir, we have Admiral Peterson on Priority Channel 1, Lieutenant Hayes announced, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. He's asking for an immediate explanation of the situation. Tell the Admiral I'll brief him in 10 minutes, Williams replied, rubbing his temples where a massive headache was building. And get me a full security detail to Princess Zara's quarters. If she decides to leave early because of this mess, we're all going to be in very deep trouble. But Princess Zara wasn't thinking about leaving. She was standing in her luxurious guest quarters, staring out at the stars through the massive viewport, trying to understand what had just happened to her carefully ordered world. Her advisor, Elder Thyrus, entered without being announced, a privilege he'd earned through 40 years of loyal service to the royal family. His ancient crystalline form moved slowly across the room, each step deliberate and thoughtful. "You seem troubled, young princess," Thyrus observed, his voice carrying the musical tones that marked him as one of the old nobility. "Perhaps you would like to discuss the events in the training bay." Princess Zara turned from the window, her crystalline features flickering with emotions she couldn't quite name. "That human soldier disrespected me in front of his entire unit. He should be arrested for insubordination." "Should he?" Thyrus asked mildly. "According to whose law? He is not a citizen of the Crystal Empire, and he was not under our command. He simply chose to stop serving as your escort. He made a spectacle of himself. He disrupted the entire diplomatic mission." Thyrus moved closer to the viewport, his ancient eyes reflecting the starlight. "Tell me, princess, what do you know about this soldier who walked away from you?" "What does it matter? He's just another human warrior, probably bitter about losing the war." "Actually," Thyrus said quietly, "I took the liberty of accessing the human military databases. Sergeant Jake Rodriguez has quite an interesting service record." Princess Zara tried to look disinterested, but something in her advisor's tone made her pay attention. "He enlisted 12 years ago, straight from university where he was studying to become a teacher," Thyrus continued. "He wanted to serve his people during the war, even though he had no military background. His first assignment was as a communications specialist on a supply transport." "How ordinary," Princess Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. 3 years into his service, his transport ship was attacked by one of our battle fleets near the Centauri system. The ship was badly damaged and losing life support. Most of the crew evacuated in escape pods, but Sergeant Rodriguez stayed behind. Despite herself, Princess Zara found herself listening more carefully. There was a civilian research station nearby with over 300 people, scientists, families, children. The transport was carrying the only medical supplies that could save them from a plague outbreak. Rodriguez knew that if he abandoned the ship, those people would die. Thyrus paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. He spent 18 hours alone on a dying ship, manually rerouting power systems and keeping the engines running while under constant fire from our forces. He delivered those medical supplies, saved 300 lives, and was found unconscious at his post when rescue finally arrived. Princess Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How do you know all this?" "Because," Thyrus said softly, "I was commanding the fleet that was trying to stop him. I watched our sensors track that single human ship as it limped through space, refusing to surrender, refusing to change course. Our tactical computers couldn't understand why one soldier would risk everything for people he'd never met." The princess sat down heavily in one of her chamber's crystal chairs. "You never told me this story." "There was no reason to, until today. But perhaps you should also know that after the war ended, many human colonies requested Rodriguez specifically for peacekeeping missions. They trusted him because he had proven he would protect anyone under his care, even at the cost of his own life." Princess Zara stared at her advisor, her mind reeling. The soldier she had dismissed as incompetent was actually a decorated hero. The man she had insulted in front of his peers had once risked everything to save strangers. "He volunteered for this diplomatic assignment," Thyrus continued. "According to his file, he specifically requested to be part of your honor guard because he believed that our peoples could find common ground. He spent weeks studying our culture, learning our customs, preparing to serve you with honor." "Stop," Princess Zara said quietly. "Please, just stop." But Thyrus wasn't finished. "Do you know what the human military calls someone who abandons their post in the face of danger? They call it desertion, and it is punishable by imprisonment. Do you know what they call someone who stays at their post despite impossible odds? They call it heroism, and they give medals for it." Princess Zara stood up abruptly and walked back to the viewport. In the reflection of the glass, she could see her own crystalline features, but for the first time in her life, she didn't like what she saw. Today, Thyrus said gently, you had the opportunity to witness human heroism firsthand. Not on a battlefield, not in a moment of crisis, but in a simple act of dignity. That soldier could have argued with you, could have defended himself, could have explained all the ways you were wrong about his people. Instead, he chose to preserve his honor by walking away. I don't understand, Princess Zara whispered. In our culture, we believe that honor comes from following orders, from maintaining discipline, from never showing weakness. But humans seem to believe that honor sometimes requires standing up for what is right, even when it costs them everything they have worked for. Princess Zara pressed her hand against the cool glass of the viewport. Somewhere on this station, Jake Rodriguez was probably packing his belongings, preparing to leave in disgrace. His military career was likely over. His reputation was probably destroyed. All because she had chosen to judge his entire species based on one small mistake. By a nervous young soldier. Thyrus, she said finally, what have I done? You have learned something important about the difference between respect and fear, her advisor replied. Our people respect us because they must, but that human soldier's troops respect him because he has earned it. And today you threw that earned respect back in his face. Princess Zara closed her eyes, remembering the look on Jake's face when he had spoken about his soldiers. There had been no anger there, no hatred, just disappointment. The kind of disappointment that came from expecting better from someone and being proven wrong. Can this be fixed? She asked. That, Thyrus said, depends entirely on what you choose to do next. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings trying to find their way toward understanding. But for the first time since arriving at the station, Princess Zara began to think that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for something better than the contempt she had brought with her from home. 2 days had passed since Jake walked out of Training Bay 4, and he was almost finished packing. His quarters felt strange now, empty shelves where his books had been, bare walls where his commendations used to hang, everything neat and organized. For whoever would live here next. He'd been expecting the knock on his door for hours. Captain Williams had already visited twice, trying to convince him to reconsider his decision. Admiral Peterson had sent 3 different messages from Earth Command, each one more urgent than the last. Even his old squad mates had stopped by, some to argue with him, others just to say goodbye. But when the soft chime announced another visitor, Jake wasn't prepared for who he found standing in his doorway. Princess Zara stood alone in the corridor, without her usual escort of guards and advisors. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had in the training bay. Her crystalline features seemed dimmer, as if the light inside her had been turned down several notches. "May I come in?" she asked, and Jake noticed that her voice lacked the commanding tone he'd grown used to over the past few days. Jake stepped aside without saying anything. What was the point of being polite now? His career was already over, his reputation already destroyed. Whatever she wanted to say to him couldn't make things any worse. Princess Zara entered his sparse quarters slowly, her multifaceted eyes taking in every detail. She paused at his desk, where a single photo sat next to his nearly empty duffel bag. The picture showed Jake with his old squad on New Mars, all of them grinning at the camera despite the war zone behind them. Half the people in that photo hadn't made it home. "These were your friends," she said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "Some of them," Jake replied. "The lucky ones are still alive somewhere else. The rest," he shrugged, not trusting himself to finish that sentence. Princess Zara picked up the photo carefully, as if it might break in her crystalline hands. "This man here," she said, pointing to a young soldier with a bright smile. "He looks very young. Danny. Chen. He was 22 when that picture was taken. 23 when he died holding a bridge on Kepler Station so a civilian transport could escape. Jake's voice was steady, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He saved 800 people that day, kids mostly, families trying to get away from the fighting. Princess Zara set the photo down gently and turned to face him. I have spent the last 2 days learning about you, Jake Rodriguez. About your service record, your commendations, the people you've saved over the years. Congratulations, Jake said flatly. I hope it was educational. It was, she replied, ignoring his sarcasm. I learned that you once stayed on a damaged ship for 18 hours to deliver medical supplies to a plague-stricken colony. I learned that you've been decorated for bravery 7 times. I learned that when other soldiers request transfer assignments, they specifically ask to serve under your command. Jake stared at her, not sure where this conversation was going. What's your point, Your Highness? My point, Princess Zara said, and for the first time since he'd met her, she sounded uncertain, is that I was wrong about you. And if I was wrong about you, then I was probably wrong about your people as well. Jake felt something inside his chest loosen slightly, but he wasn't ready to let his guard down yet. You figured that out all by yourself? Princess Zara's crystalline features flickered with what might have been embarrassment. My advisor helped. Elder Thyrus has been very educational about human concepts of honor and dignity. She moved to the viewport that dominated one wall of Jake's quarters, staring out at the stars beyond. In my culture, we are taught that strength comes from never showing weakness, never admitting mistakes, never backing down from any challenge. A crystal warrior would rather die than appear incompetent in front of others. That sounds lonely, Jake said, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. It is, Princess Zara admitted, but it's also safe. If you never show vulnerability, then nobody can use it against you. If you never admit you're wrong, then you never have to face the consequences of your mistakes. Jake watched her reflection in the viewport glass. She looked more human somehow, more real than the imperious royal who had insulted him 2 days ago. But you, she continued, turning back to face him, you did something I've never seen before. When I attacked your honor and the honor of your soldiers, you didn't fight back. You didn't try to prove me wrong with words or weapons. You simply left. I didn't see the point in arguing with someone who had already made up her mind about us. That's just it, Princess Zara said, stepping closer. You proved me wrong by doing exactly that. In my culture, walking away from an insult is considered cowardice. But watching you remove your armor piece by piece, listening to you defend your soldiers with such quiet dignity, there was nothing cowardly about what you did. Jake studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all he saw was sincerity, and maybe something that looked like regret. I spent 23 years believing that humans were inferior to my people in every way that mattered, Princess Zara continued. I came here expecting to confirm that belief. Instead, I met a soldier who values the lives of his people more than his own career, who chooses honor over obedience, who walks away from a fight because winning isn't worth compromising his principles. She reached into the folds of her ceremonial robes and withdrew something small and glowing. It was a crystal pendant, about the size of Jake's thumb, that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. This is a token of respect, she said, holding it out to him. In my culture, it's given to warriors who have demonstrated exceptional honor in the face of impossible odds. I would like you to have it. Jake stared at the pendant, not moving to take it. Why? Because I want to ask you something, Princess Zara said. I want to ask if you would consider staying on as part of my guard. Not as a subordinate following orders, but as an equal helping to build something better between our peoples. Jake looked from the pendant to her face and back again. You're serious. Completely serious. I can't undo the things I said in that training bay. I can't take back the insult to you and your soldiers, but I can try to learn from my mistakes. And I think I could learn a lot from you." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Jake thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of war, the friends he'd lost, the peace that had seemed so fragile just days ago. He thought about Tommy Wilson, the young soldier who had made one small mistake and been humiliated for it. He thought about all the other young soldiers, both human and crystal, who were counting on people like him to make sure the war never started again. Finally, Jake reached out and took the crystal pendant. It felt warm in his palm, and the light. Inside, it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "But I want to make something clear, Your Highness. If we're going to work together, it has to be based on mutual respect. No more insults. No more superiority games. No more treating my people like they're beneath you." Princess Zara nodded solemnly. "I understand completely. And Jake?" She paused, as if testing out the sound of his name. "I hope you'll call me Zara. Friends shouldn't have to use titles all the time." Jake felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth for the first time in 2 days. "All right, Zara, but I'm keeping my armor on." Princess Zara laughed, and the sound was like crystal, chimes in a gentle breeze. "I wouldn't expect anything less from a warrior of honor." Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself approved of this small step toward understanding between two very different peoples who were learning, slowly, but surely, that they might not be so different after all.